What if I told you that an interstellar object has just dispatched a signal pointed directly at Earth, and NASA hasn't figured out its meaning yet? Hang around, because what transpires next could transform humanity eternally and totally shatter your perceptions. Currently, an astonishing occurrence is taking place within our solar system, something utterly unprecedented that no person has ever observed prior. In the wee hours of October 17th, 2025, far out in the California desert, NASA's Deep Space Network captured a signal, not mere noise, not simple static. You know, if the enigma of 3I Atlas grips you and you'd love additional brain-twisting cosmic narratives, pound that like button and signal to the cosmos that you're tuned in. Every single tap aids in sustaining the pursuit of the enigmatic. But it turned out to be a methodical, recurring electromagnetic impulse emanating from the cryptic interstellar wanderer dubbed 3I Atlas, the identical entity that's confounded researchers from the moment it initially penetrated our solar system. The signal endured for exactly 11.3 seconds per loop, recurring with impeccable accuracy every 47 minutes. And this is the point where it turns genuinely hair-raising. Across merely 5 hours of scrutiny, the signal's intensity surged by more than 300%, as if an entity concealed within that empty structure was rousing itself, energizing, gearing up for the forthcoming events. You know, NASA technicians eliminated any equipment failure. SETI authorities dismissed organic explanations. What they picked up wasn't disarray. It was dialogue, a logical emission from an item that perhaps isn't a comet in the slightest. And then, after 3 days, the situation altered entirely because the signal didn't simply carry on. It advanced. It grew targeted. And per path evaluations, it directed squarely toward Earth. Remain engaged, because the subsequent developments will overhaul our comprehension of the cosmos as a whole. You know, at the point when NASA's Deep Space Network first honed in on the signal from 3I Atlas, experts assumed it might be an anomaly, possibly ambient disruption, a rogue rebound from a satellite, or stellar interference. But upon dissecting the frequency, everything flipped. You know, the broadcast arrived at 1.42 gigahertz, the specific frequency released by a hydrogen of the most prevalent component across the universe. Stargazers label it the water hole, a tranquil segment in the stellar range where any savvy society would presumably dispatch a communiqué. Why? Because hydrogen exists universally. Every life form examining the heavens would spot its imprint. In essence, whoever originated this signal desired it to be grasped. Now, however, this wasn't only a plain note. Embedded in the looping 11.3 second sequence were strata of arrangement, interlaced designs that appeared to convey encrypted details. Envision Morse code, yet boundlessly more refined, functioning over diverse temporal dimensions. Secondary motifs reiterated every 1.7 seconds, and embedded in those, rapid alterations sparkled every split second as though a veiled dispatch was nestled inside. NASA's examiners enlisted codebreakers, wireless technicians, even scholars in machine learning to unravel it. And following cross-verification against every documented natural origin in academia, pulsars, magnetars, quasars, solar disruptions. The verdict they arrived at dispatched tremors throughout the organization. The chance that this signal stems from artifice tops 99.7%. That's the moment when subdued alarm commenced filtering through NASA's operations centers, because if this signal isn't haphazard, if it doesn't arise from the environment, then an entity beyond is purposefully addressing us, you know. And precisely when researchers have figured they could commence comprehending it, 3I Atlas executed an unanticipated maneuver. It modified the communiqué. 3 days post the primary identification, the configuration that had investigators riveted to their displays abruptly mutated. On the evening of October 20th, immediately following 11:15 p.m. Eastern Time, the emission from 3I Atlas transmuted. No more a constant throb reverberating across the void, but a honed, purposeful eruption. For 8 minutes and 24 seconds, the signal constricted, transitioning from an expansive stellar dissemination into a meticulous guided ray. Figures from the Arecibo Legacy Observatory in Puerto Rico, hurriedly reinstated amid the urgency, substantiated the implausible. That ray wasn't meandering haphazardly amid the emptiness. It fixated on Earth. Innate radio discharges don't operate thus. They disseminate. They emanate omnidirectionally akin to undulations on a lake. But what NASA beheld seemed fabricated, an apparatus proficient in channeling electromagnetic force over cosmic expanses with surgical exactitude. That sort of dominance necessitates tech that humankind has solely attained in latter eras. And this entity hailed from past the constellations. You know, technicians crunched the data repeatedly. The synchronization wasn't fortuitous. The stance of 3I Atlas, the ray's course, and Earth's spatial placement, they all synced impeccably. An entity or individual had zeroed in on us intentionally. And this constitutes the element that deprives NASA's experts of slumber. The chronology. The signal mutated merely 9 days preceding 3I Atlas arcing behind the sun, wholly obscured from our surveillance, nearly as if it proclaimed, "Examine attentively ere I fade." You know, was it a salutation, an admonition, or a timer? No individual at NASA held the resolution. But one certainty prevailed. Whatever dwells within that cosmic nomad has merely initiated its premier gesture. You know, by daybreak on October 21st, the ambience inside NASA had pivoted from inquisitiveness to regulated turmoil. In all command hubs, from Goldstone to Goddard, murmurs supplanted dialogue, and monitors formerly exhibiting real-time metrics now solely exhibited the term restricted. The signal proved authentic. It proved targeted, and it amplified. Ordinarily, an unveiling of this caliber would inflame the scholarly realm, media bulletins, dialogues, international banners. But on this occasion, nil. No posts, no proclamations, merely hush. That's when intel commenced seeping regarding an entity dubbed the Discovery Protocol. A covert crisis blueprint NASA forged post-Oumuamua's peculiar traversal years prior. It delineates precisely the protocol if we ever discern traces of alien engineering. Phase 1, authenticate the intel. Phase 2, inform governmental and armed affiliations. Phase 3, uphold a 72-hour information embargo prior to divulging anything formally. That's to thwart disinformation. Informally, it's to procure duration. But here's the curve. Those 72 hours elapsed. We're presently beyond the 5-day benchmark. And not a solitary bureau, not NASA, not the European Space Agency, not China's National Space Administration, has vocalized a syllable. Even the International Astronomical Union, which disseminates findings nearly instantaneously, has plunged into absolute obscurity. You know, astrophysicist Avi Loeb, overseer of the Galileo project, fractured the stillness via a dispatch that's proliferated virally amid connoisseurs. He inscribed, "We behold organizational inertia confronting the phenomenal. This isn't science's conduct. This is apprehension's conduct." You know, and conceivably he's accurate, because when global space entities abruptly halt conversing concurrently, you must inquire, what do they perceive that we're barred from? Persevere with me, because in the ensuing segment, the chronicle veers from concealment to an affair vastly more disconcerting. 3I Atlas might not merely be relaying a dispatch. It could be scrutinizing us and appraising our retort. As NASA's reticence amplified, a theoretical physicist advanced to execute what savants master supremely. Ponder the unfathomable. If 3I Atlas transmitted purposefully, then the quandary wasn't solely what it articulated, but the rationale. You know, he sketched 3 feasible vignettes, each more disquieting than its predecessor. The inaugural, what he denominated the innocuous supposition, 3I Atlas could constitute not but an archaic sentinel, a mechanized voyager propelled by a society extinct eons ago, serenely executing its encoded directive. The signal might merely be a condition marker, a courteous declaration asserting, "I perceive you. I affirm your existence." In that instance, we face no peril. We're merely a fragment of its astral intelligence assemblage, one juncture amid multitudes, you know, but subsequently emerges the cautionary supposition. Pursuant to this, the signal's chronology just antecedent to perihelion, the entity's nearest solar proximity might not be capricious. He conjectured that the vacant innards of 3I Atlas could encompass diminutive modules, sentinels engineered to disseminate whilst it traverses aft the sun. The singular interval when we cannot behold it, the communique could be a bulletin, a placid timbre in the obscurity uttering, we're poised to liberate an entity. Refrain from intervention. No. And then materializes the tertiary vignette, the one that discomposes even the most judicious intellects, the trial supposition. What if this comprehensive progression is calculated incitement? A mechanism to calibrate our demeanor under duress, to discern our response to the obscure, to inspect our harmony, our trepidation, our aptitude to unite or disintegrate. Because here's the discomfiting verity. Presently, humanity's rejoinder hasn't been valor. It's been muteness, clandestinity, and frenzy. And if an entity yonder is surveilling, that rejoinder constitutes intelligence. You know, every throb, every ray, every subdued administrative conclave is being chronicled not by us, but by whatsoever sagacity dispatched this signal. You know, and as Three-Eye Atlas nears the sun, one interrogation reverberates more vociferously than any. Are we the scrutineers, or the scrutinized? At this juncture, every shard of intel on Three-Eye Atlas had evolved insurmountable to disregard. The profounder savants probed, the queerer it manifested until he ultimately articulated what none desired to heed. The prospects that this constitutes a natural artifact are infinitesimally diminutive. Let's deconstruct it. The entity doesn't comport like any comet or asteroid chronicled. It's vacant, its interior compactness incongruent with dense boulder. It retarded as it infiltrated the solar system, and feet no cosmic rubble could accomplish sans impetus. Its route synchronizes flawlessly with the ecliptic plane within scant degrees, a meticulousness that would daunt even our foremost space architects. And recollect the Mars traversal. The chronology proved so meticulous. Savants computed the fortuity probabilities at beneath 1 in 50,000. Splendid. Then exist the verdant spectral discharges. Peculiar chemical insignias no recognized constituent can engender organically. Append to that the logical electromagnetic signal disseminated at the hydrogen frequency, throbbing with elaborate arithmetical architecture and now contracting into a guided ray oriented directly at Earth. And precipitously every serendipity disintegrates. You know, each aberration singly might strain credence, but collectively they pulverize it. The intel doesn't depict a comet. It depicts an apparatus, something contrived, something primordial, voyaging through light years of stellar abyss with design. He admonished that humanity may already be traversing inaugural encounter, and that we are profoundly unprepared for what that portends. Because if this entity is monitoring us, it's been enacting so for months, tacitly gauging, archiving, acclimating, and the signal we've acquired might not be a reception whatsoever. It could be an instigation. So as October 29th approaches, the day Three-Eye Atlas vanishes aft the sun, the globe's preeminent telescopes are being repositioned, every transducer calibrated, every receiver attuned, because once it advances beyond the solar radiance, we'll forfeit it for 3 protracted weeks. And when it resurfaces, we'll discern. I discern. As October 29th inched nearer, a muted strain permeated the scholarly domain. The variety that resonates in your essence when an entity colossal is impending. Three-Eye Atlas was now solely days from perihelion, its closest solar transit, and every terrestrial deep space receiver was anchored on its locus. You know, but an oddity was transpiring. The erstwhile potent signal had initiated mutation. It wasn't waning. It was condensing, compacting into more constricted, hastier eruptions, each more labyrinthine than the prior. The hydrogen frequency now conveyed modulated overtones, stratified resonances that some portray as melodic, others as numerical verse. No innate fountain could achieve that. It was as if the signal per se was priming, escalating toward an ultimate dissemination, right? At NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, technicians discerned an entity even more alarming. The entity's pace was diminishing marginally, as if administering retrograde propulsion. A comet approximating the sun should hasten, not retard. Yet, Three-Eye Atlas defied gravity's grasp as though it were decelerating. Now, concurrently, telescopes in Chile, Hawaii, and Spain ensnared transient gleams of luminescence flickering along its facade, triangular configurations that revolved in concert, almost akin to a code progression unfolding contemporaneously. Some savants analogized it to a correspondence protocol, others to a mechanistic transfiguration, you know, and then in an infrequent public manifestation, he uttered an entity that propagated shudders through the scholarly fellowship, right? When you possess geometry, symmetry, and modulation all harmonized in profound space, you're not beholding a boulder. You're beholding volition. Three concentric helices intersecting like a stellar emblem. Some asserted it mimicked a magnetic field schema. Others asserted it appeared uncannily like the DNA double helix, but transposed. You know, then utter quiescence. You know, for the ensuing 72 hours, savants globally frantically dissected the intel, questing for any vestigial vestige. But the deep space pursuit mechanisms, even those susceptible enough to perceive Voyager beyond the heliopause, unearthed not even motes. The trajectory that once conveyed 3I Atlas was now barren. Right. In a crisis colloquy, he depicted it optimally. You know, when a natural artifact transits aft the sun, you can prognosticate its egress locus. But this one, you know, didn't conform to physics. It conformed to volition. You know, and here's the contortion that none anticipated. Amid the eclipse, a novel signal commenced, not from remote space, but from Earth's superior atmosphere. The selfsame throb configuration, but reflected rearward toward the sun. You know, was it a reverberation, a riposte, or substantiation that whatsoever Atlas embodied had already materialized? Because somewhere in the hush betwixt our emissions and the sun's brilliance, an entity had transmuted, an entity imperceptible, an entity biding, you know. And in 3 weeks, when it resurfaces from the sun's opposing flank, the world will ultimately ascertain what? Okay, late November, subsequent to 3 extended weeks of expectancy, 3I Atlas ultimately resurfaced from aft the sun. But what stargazers beheld defied every prognostication. It wasn't merely persisting along its anticipated route. An entity had altered. Its course had subtly deviated as if it had performed a deliberate path rectification, right? And the signal, the one that had been mute for weeks, resurfaced with renewed vigor, now exhibiting bizarre oscillations that mimicked wobbling jets of ionic material, spiraling in patterns that no ordinary comet could produce naturally. Observations from ground-based telescopes revealed a dramatic antitail extending hundreds of thousands of kilometers, composed of particles far larger than typical sunlight-scattering dust, as if the object was shedding massive fragments in a controlled manner. Scientists noted that its brightness had intensified 7-fold faster than any known Oort cloud comet at similar solar distances, shifting from a reddish tint to an eerie blue glow, suggesting exotic chemical reactions or perhaps engineered luminescence at play. You know, this wasn't just a rock tumbling through space. The data pointed to something more, with unusual levels of nickel and cyanide detected in its coma, unlike anything ever seen in our solar system's visitors. As December unfolded, the object's behavior grew even stranger. Significant non-gravitational accelerations in all 3 directional components. A shift in peak acceleration timing that defied standard orbital mechanics. And brief, unexplained bursts of high-energy emissions that coincided with global reports of electronic glitches and atmospheric disturbances on Earth. SETI teams, despite exhaustive scans, reported no definitive technosignatures, but whispers among insiders suggested the lack of detection might itself be a clue, as if the signals were encrypted beyond our current capabilities. By mid-December, as 3I Atlas began receding from the inner solar system, its velocity inexplicably stabilized, hinting at internal propulsion adjustments, and spectral analysis uncovered unknown materials in its emissions, fueling debates about whether this was a natural oddity or a probe from afar. You know, Avi Loeb and his Galileo Project team published findings on the object's tightly collimated jets and anomalous dust ejections, arguing that the probabilities of such features occurring naturally were vanishingly small, especially given its precise ecliptic alignment and perihelion timing. As Christmas approached, on December 25, 2025, amateur astronomers worldwide reported fleeting visual anomalies, triangular light patterns flickering on the object's surface, rotating in unison like a cosmic code being executed in real time. NASA's delayed release of high-resolution images from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, captured during the object's closest Mars flyby, revealed a Manhattan-sized core with symmetrical features that some compared to engineered geometry, though officials dismissed it as pareidolia. Yet, the images showed a glowing plume nearly 186,000 miles long, rich in carbon dioxide and other volatiles, brightening at an unprecedented rate. You know, by December 27th, as the object hurtled outward, gaining speed toward interstellar space once more, the scientific community remained divided. Was this a benign interstellar comet with quirky traits, or the harbinger of something profound? The world now confronted a profound decision: to persist in observing with wonder or endeavor to communicate in return. But the more unsettling epiphany was this: whatever intellect propelled 3i Atlas is examining us, assessing our reactions, and perchance probing whether humanity is primed for contact. And as the nights persisted, the message crystallized further. The universe wasn't simply bestowing a transient guest. It was proffering a challenge, a caveat, an inquiry. What shall we undertake next? Are we equipped for the retort? Don't halt here. The cosmos teems with enigmas poised for revelation. Tap on the subsequent video and accompany us as we probe even more astounding conundrums from the remotest expanses of existence.